If you think about it like as a race, a 400-meter race, frameworks just help you start 100 meters in. They just give you a little bit of an advantage of getting closer to the end.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Nodes of Design. To help support our mission spread knowledge, we have a very special guest in today's episode. Let's welcome Ryan Rumsey, who is the author of Business Thinking for Designers, founder of Chief Design Officer School, and CEO of Second Wave Dive, a peer coaching community for next generation of design leaders and executives. For over 20 plus years, Ryan worked as a designer and executive at Apple, Electronic Arts, USAA, Nestle, and Comcast, where he had built teams of incredibly talented and impactful designers, developers, researchers, and PMs. Ryan is also a sought-after speaker and has presented at numerous industry conferences and events. This episode gonna be super inspiring for all the upcoming designers and designers who want to be design leaders for tomorrow. We kicked off the episode with how to approach working with clients or stakeholders who may need a clear vision or direction for the project, and how could we help them define their goals as a designer. Later then we spoke on how to improve decision-making skills and confidence as designer, and Ryan has suggested us two beautiful frameworks for this. We then spoke on how to balance our creative vision with our clients or team members, what are the different strategies that found to be effective. And then we spoke on how to face criticism or negative feedback on our work and how to respond to it. In the end, Ryan had suggested some tips on how to improve business acumen as designers. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and on every Friday, we release new episodes with different creative leaders from around the world to help you better understand different concepts related to design. So don't forget to tune in into Notes of Design every Friday. With that being said, happy designing everyone. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Nodes of Design. In this episode, we have a very special guest with us. Hi Ryan, welcome to Nodes of Design.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Ryan, how was your day so far?
My day is pretty good. It's still the beginning of our day. It was dad mode all morning. I've got 3 kids, so mostly just getting them up, ready for school. Nobody complained. Everybody, ate their breakfast and got dressed and all those normal things. And then I had a relaxing morning, kind of eating breakfast before this. And so it was a good morning. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Ryan. So if you could give a brief about yourself to our audience out there.
Sure. I am a couple things that maybe people know me by, and then probably a lot of things that people don't know anything about me. So I wrote a book a few years ago called Business Thinking for Designers. So I'm an author. I run a small, tiny business called Second Wave Dive. I've been doing that for about 4 years. It's really all about creating learning spaces for kind of the next generation of design leaders and executives. And then I run a school. I put it in air quotes, but a school where we kind of go deep and we do pretty intensive courses to help people kind of really get into those design executive roles and learn how to transition out of, say, the craft or individual roles into what happens when now you have to create a strategy and lead functional teams. It's very different. Prior to all this, I worked in design for a long time, but also did product, was also a developer. So it was a weird background, but I worked at Apple and Electronic Arts and Nestle and other places and built teams for about 10 years before coming out on my own. And I currently live in rural Vermont. So if you don't know where Vermont is, it's in the northeast corner of the United States, pretty much right between Boston and Montreal. So we're just about 2 hours from both. We got 12 inches of snow. I can't convert that into the metric system right now at the moment, but think about right below your knee of snow over the weekend. So I spent all weekend making snow forts with the kids. I mentioned that I'm a dad, I am a husband, and I am an avid fan of the Liverpool Football Club. My apologies for this weekend, because this is the day after Liverpool just beat United
That's wonderful, Ryan. So what was your journey into design and how did you start? What are your tips for the beginners on starting the design journey?
I don't know if I'll have practical knowledge here because my journey was neither intentional or planned. It was very accidental. I'm kind of old. I just turned 49. And so when I started university, the World Wide Web wasn't out yet. And so was thinking about going to art school. But my parents were very pragmatic and they were like, that sounds like a painful life that you'll lead. You know, you might be poor or, you know, not poor in that categorical sense, but you might just be struggling to make ends meet. So I went to school to study engineering and hated it, eventually studied history. But at night, I started making websites because suddenly the wide web was there and I was making posters for like raves and things like this. So it was just this weird journey where I started exploring and then people started asking me to make websites for them. But I never thought of it as like a career path. I was a little lost or rambling all over the place when I was younger. And so my journey was this weird sort of moment in time too. Eventually, I started making money, making websites, and then, you know, met my wife and I was like, oh, I want my weekends off. I should do this full time. And so that began the more sort of formal journey into design. But at the time, it was really, I knew how to design in the browser. And so I could use Photoshop, but I was actually designing in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so starting there and then going back to my history background or even like informational sciences kind of stuff was where I was like, oh, I could just use my flowcharts and decision trees and all these types of things, and I can apply them to this, and that helps. And so that's my journey. I think practically for people who are starting now is know that your career will be filled with people who challenge you. So you can dig into the craft and you can dig into other things and be curious about those things, and those are great. But no matter where you are in your career, from your first day to 20 years down, and maybe you're the chief design officer, there will always be people who challenge you. So my biggest tip is to find sidekicks and champions. So if you're at the beginning of your design career, it's super important to find people who are curious about you and challenge you in healthy ways. And that, I think, will be true throughout your journey, is finding good people to work with and finding those sidekicks and champions.
That's a beautiful journey, Ryan. Thank you for sharing it with us. So let's begin our episode today. So how do you approach working with clients or holders who may need a clear vision or direction for their project? And how could we help them define their goals as designers?
So this is interesting, this question, because I think there's a lot of guidance out there that is good around making plans or, you know, jotting down the bullet notes of what somebody says, or here's how to create a vision. And I think the most important thing or the approach that I have learned about working with other people, whether they're clients, stakeholders, or peers, in establishing that clear vision and direction is really to use coaching prompts. The most effective thing to help them define their goals is to be genuinely curious about those things and then asking curious questions to get them to keep talking. Most of us can't really connect, like, say, a big, huge goal of ours to the practical day-to-day things of what that means. And so coaching prompts are great for this. There's an activity I use called preflection a lot, which is simply saying, oh, that sounds amazing. I love that. Imagine a year from now, we got that. Imagine you have this a year from now. Everything goes great. Can you tell me what has changed for you? What's different about the team or the company as a result of these things? And so those questions where you kind of ask them to reflect before they start gets them to go, oh, I never really thought of it that way. And you kind of begin this journey of where you're really getting them to talk a lot more rather than just filling out a spreadsheet or some type of plan document. Because so much of that is ensuring that that stakeholder or client knows what their own expectations are. Many of us are responsible for kind of making those things come to life. And if the person asking for that doesn't really know what good is at the beginning, you can never meet the expectations of a guest. And then you see lots of teams sort of struggling and trying to like, this is this, right? And so there's so much of this preflection or these coaching prompts that are really about validating somebody else's truth and inviting them to be more clear about what they mean. And then if somebody doesn't respond in a positive way there, it's probably not somebody I would call a sidekick or a champion. That's probably, my work initially, if I work with a client or stakeholder, is to kind of gauge how positive of a response they are. Are they willing to be more vulnerable? Are they willing to share? Because if they are at the beginning, it'll go really well. And if they're not, you can imagine that the project will continue to go that way.
Thank you so much, Ryan. So how do we improve the decision-making skills and confidence as a designer? And what are some frameworks for practicing this?
Right. First off, I'll say there is no one framework. There is no golden goose or, trophy or any of these. There's no one solid answer. And I think a lot of times it would be awesome. It would be so rad if there was just one way. And you see a lot of our frameworks are often promoted in that way. And what I would say is frameworks to help improve decision-making are not finish line documents. They're just giving you like a head start. So if you think about it like as a race, a 400-meter race, frameworks just help you start 100 meters in. They just give you a little bit of an advantage of getting closer to the end. But when it comes to decision-making for ourselves, as designers is really about knowing that we're making rational argument, knowing that if somebody says no to us, which everybody has the basic human intrinsic right to say no to us, but if they say no, confidence is about saying, well, I made a good argument. And so there are two little frameworks that can help us make really good arguments. And they're not mine. They're borrowed and kind of remixed from other places. And the first was developed in the 1960s by Barbara Minto. This framework is particularly good for making business arguments. Barbara Minto wrote a book called The Pyramid Principle. And her argumentative structure is basically what we'd call SCR, situation, complications, resolution. And it just helps you or helps us as a designer kind of say, what's a situation that everybody in the room would agree is a situation? So many of us will make an argument that says like, we need to do more research. And right off the bat, everybody says no. So that's not a good argument. Instead, what Barbara teaches is what's a situation that everybody agrees is a situation? What are three complications that we see that are preventing us from dealing with this or might get in the way of us dealing with this? And then what are possible resolutions? And it's there that the resolution to do more research we might then have where we've kind of led people to a business situation, some complications that we might be dealing with, and why now research is a good choice. But what that framework also allows us to do is do a little bit of analytical sort of work to say, what are the pros and cons of this versus a different choice? The second isn't really a framework by itself. I incorporate it into other frameworks. I incorporate it into things like an extension of OKRs I call POKRs, perspectives, objectives, and key results. But at the base of it, confidence is giving what we would call like a framing statement or a conditional statement. If you know engineering or developer stuff, a conditional statement is just an if-then statement. If we do this, then we think this will happen. And so if we can put our rationale and say something like, well, I think if we improve accessibility by ensuring that alt tags are present in 90% of our images, then that should reduce the number of errors that we have. And if we reduce the number of errors we have, we should increase adoption. And if we increase adoption, we should improve satisfaction. And if we improve satisfaction, we should create more revenue. And so that decision-making skills is really like, can we even convince ourselves that these are very good rational arguments? So no one framework, SCR and conditional statements are great two ways to start.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for beautifully explaining it. How do you balance your creative vision with your clients or the team members and their needs and expectations? And what are the strategies that found to be effective in this case?
Right. Really, really hard. If you are a people leader, if you go down into the people management path of managing or then becoming an executive leader, no doubt you will have clients or partners who are saying, I want magic to happen in this way. And then you have people that you are leading and responsible for who have different perceptions and different expectations of what good is. One of the strategies that helps me a lot is something I call create meaningful opposite. So let's talk about somebody on the team. Lots of designers say we have to, do something more accessible. We have to be more sustainable. We have to be more collective in our approach. We should think about humanity in this new way. Amazing. I love all that. And most of us are employees or trading our labor in exchange for payment, money. And so what meaningful opposites is to go to those people on the team and say, I love it. I love what you're talking about. You know what's going to help me make a business argument, a better business argument? How can we be more sustainable while increasing adoption? How could we be more conscious of accessibility while reducing the costs of making something? If you can figure out a nice little way or find business partners who are interested in that and make an argument of how we might do that together, what that's actually going to do is, as designers, we're going to think of entirely new solutions that we never thought of before. But again, that's where I'll say it helps me connect this creative vision to the needs and expectations of it. It really helps me make better argument. And so what I also talk about is, as like an organizational leader, if I'm on the VP or the chief design officer, my responsibility is to ensure that a vision is in place, not that I create it. My responsibility is to ensure that people have clear expectations, but not that I alone go off into my dark room and figure it out. And that's very different than, say, the the individual contributor responsibility of saying, like, I am responsible for making a good, interface. I am responsible for kerning, and maybe I am the one who have to do that.
That's wonderful, Ryan. Thank you so much. So as designers, how to face criticism or negative feedback on our work and how to respond to it?
We mentioned challengers before. You will always face criticism and negative feedback. This goes beyond work. This is like everyday life. This is very personal too, because how I respond might not be how others respond, because as a cis white man in tech, I have tremendous privilege afforded to me to respond in a certain way, because that's how the systems of society and colonization and all these other things have benefited me. So that being said, my experience is to start with asking myself, are they criticizing my work or me as a person? And it took me years and years and years of my own self-work to separate that, to separate my identity and how I felt about myself different than maybe the work that I did. And so how to face that is a long, complicated journey, lots of therapy and all these other things involved that were rooted in me as a person, rooted in me as how I developed as a child. And so that's why I say it's very personal. Like, everybody's personal experience with this is very personal. So how do I respond to it is much like those coaching prompts, is to be curious about it, to try to be in my own body, able to tame my own triggers, if you will, so that I can ask clarifying questions and better determine, are they criticizing my work or me as a person? And if they're criticizing my work, those same coaching prompts are to say, imagine my work went well. Well, it would be different about you. How would it change? But then to follow that up and say, okay, have you felt those things or seen those things in the past? Do you have examples? Because here we're wanting to go back and say, do the person who's criticizing me or my work, do they have a clear idea of what good is too? It goes back to that same conversation with senior stakeholders and clients, because if they don't have an idea, there's no way I can meet the expectations of a guest. But if they're criticizing me as a person, it's a very different approach. And then that involves a lot of self-work of being able to stay in my body and tame my own triggers, and yet be strong in how my expectations are not being met. And here's what I expect of you in return. And here are my boundaries, and here are what I will and won't do, but we will always face it. It will never go away. I think for a long time, I expected the more senior I got, sort of, there would be less of that for some reason, like that it would go away, that people would be more mature, there'd be more adults having conversations. It's not the truth that I've seen. It's not the experience I've had. In fact, the self-work of being able to figure out how to stay in your own body, regulate yourself is more important every new level you get, because you really have to be able to do that, because then you are perhaps responsible or representing a large number of other people too. And if you're not able to stay in your body and be present, your reaction to that will have very detrimental and sort of, additional exponential.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for beautifully explaining it. So wanted to know your take on how could designers hone their craft or improve their craft with everyday new rising of trends and patterns, and with the AI now coming in. So designers improve themselves in their craft.
These trends come and go. I'm going to continue to say curious about them. We've been hearing for years and years about all these things, of how tech will replace things and AI will replace things and all these things. And some things, yes, but such is the case with anything in history. That's, again, my weird perspective is having studied history, and that being my primary academic studies, is that what would it be like for a designer, if you're a designer, what would it be like to be curious about the potential of making something better or improving what you do, or helping you make decisions with more confidence with something like AI? What would be the unintentional consequences of relying solely on something like AI? How might you unintentionally do damage? And I think that gets into a lot of this stuff of my thoughts around our responsibility to learn new things, not because we have to have all these skills, but to learn them like dialect, and to continue to understand how ethics plays into decisions. Because if we're not curious there, I really think it's an abdication of responsibility for us, because suddenly we're saying, oh, we leave that to others. We let others handle that. I'm turning over ethical choices to other parts of the organization I'm part of. And my personal feelings is that's like, well, then I'm okay with how it affects other people. And that gets more into how I think about learning business, and that it's not about learning math or any of these per se, but it's more about understanding how you might be contributing unintentionally or not to marginalization, to exploitation, these types of things. And so, there's a lot behind all these things. And I think for a lot of us, it goes back to natural fears of what it might do for me and how it might affect me. They're not going away. Progress in all these areas aren't going away, and wishing that they go away does not mean that they do.
Wonderful, Ryan. So what advice would you give to designers who want to improve their business acumen?
I think of it really in two ways. If you want to go into business versus if you just want to influence how business gets done. But my advice for either is to treat it like learning a language. It's really learning linguistics. It's learning culture. It's learning philosophy. It's learning history. It's learning the love language that others receive. But it goes back to those rational arguments. I've never seen a philosophical argument in a business decision-making meeting win out without some type of translation, without some type of connection to numbers or risks as others perceive them. And so my biggest advice is, treat it like learning a language or eating a food and learning about the food, these types of things. There's so many things that I think are interesting for designers to go learn about other people, learn about the customers that you're making for. So much of this is part of our root core, and learning business is not like a threat to what we do, but it's really learning the dialect and the languages that others receive and others love. And it's a way that we can translate what we're passionate about, but also what we're fighting for into that language that other people understand.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. So could you please share with us, how does your day look like? Any interesting stories?
Yeah. So I mentioned I live in rural Vermont. I live in the middle of nowhere, but I actually live on an eco co-housing community. So there's like 23 different households, families, if you will, in different ways. And we each have our own place, but then we co-own 270 or 262 acres of land. And what that means is we then share the responsibility of caretaking for the land and keeping the land updated. And it's all focused around sustainability and all these things. And so my days might be weird of where my neighbors run a dairy farm. And so I might, for my own mental health reasons, go pet some baby cows to start the day, sets my body up, maybe go out for a ski, here in the winter to get some exercise, come in, do a little work. I work here in the community, but in a different building in the community, do a little bit of work, but maybe afternoon, I might have to go collect eggs. I might have to pick our kids up from the bus, or yesterday build a bunch of snow forts because, who doesn't like a big fort to play in? So my day to day is this balance that I was trying to get of how can I do good work or work that I believe in and know that in order to do so, I also have to have other needs and priorities met, like petting baby cows or going home to have lunch with my wife or being home by 5 o'clock because it's movie night. So it's a strange place. Not many people live in these kind of places here in the US, but it's been really nice to kind of see balance in a different way.
That sounds so interesting, Ryan. Thank you so much for that. So we'll conclude the show by 3 favorite books of yours and also people who inspired you the most in the space.
My pleasure. I'm recommending 3 books that are like favorites now or kind of continue to be favorites, but I have lots of books. I read lots of my favorites change all the time, but 3 I will recommend, particularly for designers listening, is the first is Inclusive Design Communities by Samira Kapila. This is a pretty brand new book from a list apart. And Samira does a wonderful job of talking about how to design for more inclusive products, services, communities, these teams. I love this book, and Samira's a good friend. The second one is very practical. I love useful books, things that people can take and apply day to day. This is one of my all-time favorites. It's The User Experience Team of One by Leah Bewley. It's published by Rosenfeld Media, and there are particular chapters that are like formative of just like the basics of project management as a designer that many designers weren't taught in school or learned in boot camps or even have to manage day to day. And then suddenly, if they become a people leader, it's a lot of this stuff of project management. So I love Leah's book. The third one kind of gets more philosophical, kind of gets more into bigger things, but it's called Dark Matter and Trojan Horses by Dan Hill. I don't just recommend it because Dan is also a Liverpool fan, but that helps too. But it's this wonderful, pretty short book. I think it was published in, I want to say around 2011, 2012, 13. I can't remember. It's been around for a little while, but it gets into like bigger things and how we can often be naive if we just have our headphones and we're working in our files, how we can often be naive into how bigger decisions get made. Lastly, people who inspire me most in this space. I think the people who inspire me most right now are people who decide to become people leaders, people who go into the path to really change or start a whole new career path where their responsibilities are going to be completely different. And they're largely taking on these roles without a lot of formative development, coaching, mentoring that they got maybe as a non-people leader. And so those who are doing the daily work of leading teams and orgs right now are the people who inspire me most. I'm always inspired by people making great craft, but just right now, the people who inspire me most are those people who are trying to push and drive and advocate and support in ways that maybe weren't demonstrated to them. And so they're trying to do that from scratch. So yeah, those 3 books and People Leaders are who I'm recommending. And
thank you so much, Ryan, for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. We're looking forward to host you again in our upcoming episodes. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.